A hotel cleaner spoke Dutch in front of a millionaire. The next day, he came looking for her. Before the story begins, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? If you love emotional love stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, not only will you not miss any updates, but you'll also help this space grow and keep bringing content that touches the heart. The sound of mops sliding across the marble floor blended with the echo of distant voices and muffled laughter in the grand event hall of the Whitmore Regency Hotel in Seattle. The golden light from the chandeliers reflected in the wide mirrors, making the place look even bigger than it already was. It was late afternoon, and the day's last event, a corporate cocktail party for international executives, had just ended. In the corner of the hall, almost invisible among the misaligned chairs and forgotten glasses, 27-year-old Elena Van Dyke knelt beside a wine stain on the carpet. She wore the simple uniform of the cleaning staff. Dark pants, a grey shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and a name badge barely printed. Her red hair was tied up in a rushed bun, with a few strands escaping and sticking to her forehead from sweat. Her face was pale, with freckles scattered across her fair skin, and her green eyes always seemed distant, as if they were in another time, another place. There was no sparkle in them, only exhaustion, an old kind of exhaustion. She stood up when she heard a frail voice asking for help in hesitant Dutch. "Mevrouw, kunt u mij helpen? Ik ben verdwaald." Elena turned immediately. An elderly man with completely white hair, a wrinkled suit, and a confused expression was walking slowly near the stairs. He was one of the foreign guests, clearly disoriented. Without hesitation, she approached him with a gentle smile and replied fluently, "Ja, natuurlijk. U hoeft zich geen zorgen te maken. Ik breng u naar uw kamer." "Yes, of course. Don't worry, I'll take you to your room." Her voice was soft, polite, and filled with restrained affection, something not taught in hotel training. On the other side of the hall, standing at the mezzanine entrance, 35-year-old Ryan Whitmore observed the scene with a furrowed brow. Tall, in a flawless dark suit with stubble and slicked-back brown hair, he carried the kind of elegance that didn't need to be announced. His blue-gray eyes were cold, analytical, used to judging environments and people in seconds. But when he heard that voice in Dutch, fluent, serene, almost maternal, he froze. It was his late mother's language, a language he rarely heard outside the painful memories of his childhood. And now, from the mouth of a cleaning staff member. He stepped forward, intrigued. He couldn't clearly see her face, only the pinned red strands of hair and the gentle gestures with which she guided the elderly man toward the service elevator. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't seek applause. She simply disappeared. Behind the metal doors, as if her existence had been a brief breath, Ryan stood still, unmoving, feeling something inexplicable stir inside him. "Who are you?" he murmured to himself. Later, already in the car with tinted windows, as the driver took him to the penthouse downtown, he was still silent. His assistant tried to go over the week's schedule, but Ryan wasn't listening. The image of that woman, whom he had barely seen, wouldn't leave his mind. It wasn't just the language. It was the posture, the dignity with which she spoke, the contrast between the job she had and the clear cultural depth in every word. Deep down, he felt a restlessness he hadn't experienced in years. He couldn't explain why, but something in him said he had to see her again. That night, Elena was having dinner alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of Seattle. Sitting at the table, beside her sick mother sleeping on the couch, she shared a plate of rice and vegetables with her 14-year-old younger brother. The boy talked about school, but she barely listened. She was thinking about the strange moment with the guest and the silhouette of a man standing in the distance with a look that seemed to truly see her. For the first time in a long time, she wondered, did someone actually notice that I exist? She had no idea that, at that very moment, one of the most powerful men in the city was opening the hotel's internal records, looking for her name. The service elevator closed slowly behind Elena, leaving behind the echo of her silent steps and the invisible presence that still lingered in the hotel's golden hall. The Dutch gentleman, now calmer, gently held her arm. She guided him naturally, like someone used to caring without being noticed. Inside, though, Elena felt something strange that night, as if, for a moment, her voice had broken through a wall that life had spent years building, as if someone, somewhere, had finally heard her. Meanwhile, from the mezzanine above, Ryan Whitmore was still standing, unmoving, his eyes fixed on the closed elevator. The world around him seemed to have gone quiet. For the first time in a long while, his heart was racing, not because of a deal about to close, but because of something he couldn't name. "She spoke the way my mother used to," he murmured, not realizing he had spoken out loud. His assistant, confused, looked at him. "Mr. Whitmore." Ryan didn't respond. He turned on his heel and quickly left the hall, heading down the internal stairs, his jaw tight. He needed answers. On his phone screen, he typed a short message. "To the hotel manager, I need a list of all the night shift cleaning staff, urgent." On the other side of the city, Elena was helping the gentleman settle into his room and left a glass of water on the table, along with a note written in Dutch in calm, elegant handwriting. "Rest well. If you need anything, please ask at the front desk." Before leaving, she took one last look around. She didn't know why, but she felt watched, as if something in the world had shifted, like an invisible veil had started to fall. Already back in the service hallway, she leaned against the wall for a second and closed her eyes. The day had been long. Her back hurt, her feet throbbed. But it was more than just physical exhaustion. It was that persistent feeling of always being there, but never truly seen. "Why did I speak in Dutch? How stupid," she whispered, to herself, frustrated. The last time she had spoken that language out loud was at her father's funeral 3 years earlier. As she walked through the narrow hallway that led to the staff locker room, something inside her felt reopened. An ancestral longing, an identity she had buried in order to fit into the grey uniform she wore every day. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the hotel 2 hours earlier than usual. He wore a dark sweater instead of his usual suit. He was restless, with slightly messy hair and faint dark circles under his eyes that revealed a sleepless night. The manager, an elegant middle-aged woman, handed him a printed sheet with names and shifts. He held it firmly, his eyes scanning each line. Then he stopped. "Elena Van Dyke," he read in a low voice. The pronunciation flowed naturally. He recognized the last name immediately. It was Dutch, common in Amsterdam, where his mother had been born. "Where is she now?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I believe her shift is already over. She usually leaves around 8. But I can call her back if you'd like," the manager replied, surprised by the unusual request. Ryan hesitated for a second. He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't wait either. "Just tell me where I can find her." A few minutes later, he parked discreetly beside the bus stop where employees left. The sky was overcast, typical of Seattle, and a light drizzle had begun to fall. On the wooden bench with an old backpack on her lap, Elena sat looking at the ground, unaware of the world. She didn't see him approaching, not until she heard his voice, that deep, precise voice that always seemed to know exactly what it wanted. "You speak Dutch better than a lot of people born there." Elena looked up slowly, surprised. Her heart raced. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, confused, almost in a whisper. He looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. It wasn't authority nor pity. It was something more human, rarer. "I'd like to talk to you if you'll let me." She looked down, clutching the straps of her backpack. If this is about what happened yesterday, I was just helping a guest. That wasn't my intention. I know, he interrupted gently. I'm not here as a CEO. I'm here as someone who heard a voice he can't forget. The silence between them was long, tense, full of unspoken questions. The drizzle grew heavier, and yet neither of them moved. She looked at him again, this time with a spark in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Why me? She murmured. I'm just nobody. He shook his head slowly, his voice low, almost breaking. No, you're someone who made me remember everything I had forgotten. And in that moment, with the sound of cars in the background, the raindrops marking the rhythm of time, and two worlds colliding for the first time without rush, something began that was impossible to ignore. Something neither of them was ready for, but both could already feel. Something that would change everything. The next morning dawned gray, like so many others in Seattle. The light rain still fell, dripping on the hotel windowsills like an unhurried clock. On the top floor of the executive tower, Ryan Whitmore stood in front of a large glass window, his hands in his slacks pockets and his gaze lost on the horizon. But that morning, the world outside didn't matter much to him. He turned, adjusted his shirt collar, and dismissed the assistant who was already waiting with the day's schedule. Tell them I'm going downstairs for a routine inspection, and that I don't want to be interrupted. The assistant, confused, just nodded. It was rare, almost unheard of, to see the CEO walking through the hallways meant for staff, and even rarer to see him with rolled-up sleeves, no blazer, and an expression so full of intent that no one dared question it. Ryan took the internal stairs down, avoiding the elevators. He didn't want to draw attention. He was a man used to being in charge, but that morning, something in him was softening, as if he were about to step into unfamiliar territory. The basement floor smelled of disinfectant, stale coffee, and the sweat of tired people. Staff moved through the corridor with trays, linen carts, buckets. No one noticed him at first. He walked with slow but steady steps until he saw her. Elena was crouched down, organizing cleaning supplies on a metal shelf in the storage room. She was wearing the gray uniform again, her hair tied back and a cloth tied tightly around her wrist. The weak light from the ceiling fixture barely lit her face, but her eyes glowed faintly, as if refusing to go dark despite the exhaustion. She saw him when she looked up, and her expression froze. Her green eyes widened slightly, and the hand holding a disinfectant bottle trembled for a moment. She stood up slowly, like someone bracing for a reprimand. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, averting her gaze. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were coming down here." He stepped forward, voice calm. "Actually, I came to see you." Elena lowered her eyes, surprised, but didn't know what to say. She felt completely out of place in that moment. Her breath grew heavier, like she was about to make a mistake she didn't know how to avoid. Ryan stepped a little closer. "I wanted to thank you for the way you helped that gentleman yesterday. Your Dutch fluency is, impressive." He paused. "Were you born there?" "There?" She hesitated, gripping the cloth in her hands. "My parents are Dutch. I was born here in Spokane. We spoke Dutch at home when I was a kid, then barely at all. Only when my mum got sick. She forgot everything, except the language." Ryan tilted his head slightly, as if feeling the weight of it. "Is she still alive?" Elena nodded without looking at him. "Yes, but most of the time she doesn't remember who I am." She paused, like she had said too much, then added with a brief, humorless smile, "I talk to her like she's still there. Sometimes she smiles, sometimes not, but I keep trying." There was a heavy silence between them. Ryan took a deep breath. He didn't know why it moved him so much. Maybe because he too knew what it was like to talk to someone who no longer responds. His mother had passed without saying goodbye, and he'd been too busy to realize how much he missed the way she used to say his name, in Dutch. "You speak the way she did?" he said finally, with raw honesty. Calmly, no rush, like your words carry weight. Elena finally looked at him, and in that look there was a mix of shame, pride, and resistance. She didn't want to be seen like this. Hands stained by cleaning products, tired face, soul, worn out. But there was something in his gaze that wasn't judgment. It was searching. "Why are you doing this?" she asked plainly. "Coming here, talking to me? I'm just a cleaner." Ryan looked at her for a long moment, then replied, in a low voice, "Maybe that's exactly why." She stayed silent, but her eyes said everything. They said, "I'm tired, but I'm still someone." They said, "I've learned not to expect anything, but something in me still wants to believe." And there, in that narrow, windowless hallway, surrounded by buckets and damp cloths, something subtle happened. It wasn't touch nor a gesture. It was recognition, two souls who were startled at first sight, because they recognized each other. "There's a small cafe on the corner by the hotel," he said, taking a step back. "Nothing fancy, but the tea's decent. I would love to hear more about your story, but only if you want to." Elena took a moment to respond. Her fingers tightened around the cloth on her wrist. Her body said no, but her heart, long suffocated, whispered yes. "My break is at 4, she murmured, barely looking at him. "If you still want to talk, I'll be there," Ryan nodded. And without saying anything else, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a faint scent of expensive cologne, and a presence Elena knew she wouldn't be able to forget. As she returned to work, she felt her heart beating in a way it hadn't in a long time. She didn't know what it meant, but for the first time in years, she felt that someone was willing to listen to her, without trying to fix her, and that, in itself, was already the beginning of something new. The clock struck 4 in the afternoon when Elena walked into the small cafe on the corner. The bell above the door jingled softly, announcing her arrival. She was simply dressed, dark jeans, a grey wool sweater, and her hair still tied back, though a few loose strands framed her tired face. She wore no makeup. Even so, there was a quiet, honest beauty in every one of her gestures, in every line of her attentive gaze. Ryan was already there, seated at a table near the window, with 2 cups of tea on the worn wooden surface. He wore a dark coat, collar turned up, and stared out the glass as if searching for something beyond the rain-blurred window. When he saw her, he stood immediately, discreetly, but with a different kind of light in his eyes. "You came," he said with a soft smile, almost relieved. Elena nodded shyly, hanging her bag on the back of the chair. "I don't usually accept invitations like this," she murmured. "But today I felt like breaking that rule." He smiled wider, and they sat down. A brief silence settled over the table, broken only by the distant sound of the coffee machine in the back. Outside, the drizzle kept falling, giving the streets of Seattle that melancholic yet comforting air. "I figured you'd prefer tea," Ryan said, sliding one of the cups toward her. "But if you don't like it, I can order something else." She held the cup with both hands, absorbing its warmth. "It's perfect. Chamomile, right?" He looked surprised. "How'd you guess?" "My mother used to say only restless people order chamomile," she replied, giving the first genuine smile of the afternoon. And in that moment, brief and almost imperceptible, something in Ryan softened. Her laugh wasn't loud or forced. It was small, real, like it had been trapped for years, somewhere dark, and was finally allowed out. "You're different," he said, looking at her with sincerity. "Not like the people usually around me." She looked away, unsure if that was a compliment or a warning. "And what does that mean? That I don't belong in your world?" "No," he replied after a moment. "It means maybe my world isn't as complete as I thought." Elena lowered her gaze to the cup. It was hard to trust. She had seen kind looks before, and many of them came with hidden motives. But the man in front of her seemed different. There was something in his voice that didn't match the title of CEO, something of a boy who lost something too soon. "Have you always been like this?" she asked suddenly. "So curious about people who have nothing to offer you." The question came out harsher than she intended, but it was honest. Ryan smiled, not offended. "Maybe I'm trying to see if I still know how to really see people. Beyond titles, beyond appearances." She looked at him, serious. Her green eyes held something firm, almost sad. "And what do you see when you look at me?" "Someone who learned how to hide her light, but still shines." Elena held back a laugh, flustered. She shook her head and looked out at the street, trying to mask the effect those words had on her. "You're good with words. I bet you use that in meetings." "No. In meetings I use numbers and contracts, real words. I only use when I think they're worth it. Worth it." Again, silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a space where truth could breathe. Elena slowly began to relax. She shared that she studied literature for 2 years, but had to drop out to care for her mother. She talked about her younger brother, the long nights cleaning empty rooms, the letters she wrote and never sent. "Sometimes I feel like life's passing me by, you know, like a train that doesn't stop at my station." Ryan listened in silence, without interrupting, without trying to fix anything, just listening. And in that moment when she looked into his eyes and said, "That's how I feel every day," he got a little more lost in her. There was a raw beauty there, a kind of strength made of pain, of resilience, and of stubborn hope. When she laughed again, recalling a story about a guest who thought the minibar button was an intercom, he laughed too. But inside, he felt something in him changing. He didn't yet know what to call it. He only knew that, in that little corner cafe, with a woman who had sad eyes and a restrained smile, he had started to fall in love. Time passed slowly in the days that followed, as if the clock had slowed down just to make room for what was growing, without haste, between Elena and Ryan. The corner cafe became a nearly secret refuge. There were no titles, no protocols, no uniforms. There were just two opposite worlds trying, somehow, to understand each other. They kept meeting, discreetly. Long conversations at small tables, hands occasionally brushing as they reached. For the same cup, quiet laughter, glances that lasted a second longer than they should. When they spoke, it was as if the rest of the world disappeared. But the silence between them said just as much. Ryan found himself arriving earlier to the cafe, always choosing the corner table. And he'd sit watching the door, heart tight, waiting to see her cross the threshold with that careful walk, always with the old bag slung over her shoulder and her hair pulled back any old way. She didn't dress up, didn't make an entrance, but every time she walked in, it felt like he could finally breathe for the first time that day. "You always wait for me?" she asked one afternoon, seeing him already seated with tea ready. He smiled, glancing out at the rain-soaked window. "I don't wait. I just feel better when you arrive." Elena stayed quiet. The sentence landed, like a warm breeze in a soul that had been frozen for years. But there was fear. She sensed it in his gestures, in how he changed the subject when the conversation got too close to real life, in the way he always looked around, as if afraid someone might see them together. Ryan was kind, attentive, but also trapped in the world he had built with invisible walls, a world where she would never be accepted. Elena, in turn, was afraid to fool herself. She'd dreamed too many times about things that never came true. She knew men like Ryan didn't choose women like her, not in the world outside of hidden cafes. One night, while setting the dinner table at home, she heard her younger brother ask, "Why are you smiling, Lena?" She was caught off guard. hadn't even noticed. She looked at her reflection in the kitchen mirror and saw something rare. Hope. And that scared her more than anything. "For nothing," she replied, turning back to the rice on the stove. But that night, she dreamed of him. She dreamed of his hand holding hers, of his eyes searching for her face in the crowd. And when she woke up, she pressed a hand to her chest tightly, as if trying to hide a secret from her own heart. Across the city, Ryan came home late, even without meetings. He turned on the TV but didn't watch, picked up his phone but didn't call. He just sat there, in the dark of his living room, mentally replaying every conversation with Elena, every smile, every shared silence. "You've been acting strange lately," his father commented during a corporate lunch. Ryan simply replied, "Maybe I'm just starting to think with my heart." The response didn't go over well, and he knew it. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. There was a wall between them, invisible but real, built of status, differences, fears, and social expectations. Still, something in her eyes and in his said that if things kept going this way, someone would end up crossing the line. That afternoon, in the now empty cafe, Ryan took Elena's hand across the table without warning. She didn't pull away, but she didn't say anything either. She just looked at him as if to ask without words, "Are you sure about this?" He answered with a whisper, "You scare me, because you make everything in me feel simpler and more real." She lowered her gaze, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I don't know if I can believe in all this." "Me neither," he admitted, "but I want to try. With you." Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside, both were still weathering storms. And what they didn't yet know was that the world around them didn't forgive love stories that strayed too far from the script. The Seattle sky was heavy with clouds when Elena climbed the hotel's service stairs to the rooftop. She wore her light gray uniform, already a little wrinkled after so many hours of work. The light rain soaked the shoulders of her thin jacket, but she didn't care. Her heart pounded as if each step brought her closer to a limit, and something she wasn't sure she wanted to cross. Ryan was waiting there, under the awning on the rooftop, hands in the pockets of his overcoat. The view of the city, grey and melancholy, was framed by the wet outlines of buildings and the glow of headlights starting to light up below. The wind tousled his dark brown hair, and his blue-grey eyes looked even more intense in the soft light of dusk. Elena stopped a few steps from him. Both remained silent for a few seconds. The sound of the rain between them seemed to fill all the words they hadn't had the courage to say. "Why here?" she asked quietly. "Because no one comes here." "And because it's where I can breathe," Ryan replied, his voice rough. She crossed her arms, trying to keep a safe distance, but nothing in her felt safe anymore. "Did you call me here to talk or to confuse me even more?" Ryan stepped closer. "I called you because I can't go another day without hearing your voice. Because when you leave, something in me goes with you." Elena felt her throat close, tried to speak, but her voice failed. "You know this doesn't make sense. You have a whole life on the other side of that wall. You're everything." "I'm missing," he interrupted. The words hung in the air like a tightrope stretched between them. Elena took one more step. Ryan's eyes searched hers, like someone begging for permission. The rain was getting heavier, and the city felt far away. They were alone in the world. She raised her hand, touching his face for the first time. Cold, fingers against warm skin. He held her hand and pulled her closer. Her face trembled, eyes brimming. "I'm scared, Ryan," she whispered, "because when I close my eyes, it's you I see, and I know this could destroy me." He touched her face with both hands, their foreheads meeting. "Then let me try to be shelter, not the storm." Their faces were so close. The kiss was there, on the edge, just one step. That's when the metal door behind them burst open. A front desk employee in a red jacket appeared on the rooftop. The shock on her face was immediate. She froze, seeing them so close, so intimate, so forbidden. Then, without saying a word, she turned on her heel and hurried down the stairs. Elena pulled away suddenly, her face going pale. She saw. She's going to... Ryan tried to step closer. Elena, calm down. I'll fix this. But she was already going down the stairs, hands shaking, heart racing. This will never work. We're from different worlds. And in a world, women like me become scandals. He stayed there, alone in the rain, heart crushed by something that hadn't even truly begun. The next morning, at 9 a.m., Elena was called into the manager's office. The HR director read from a paper with a neutral expression. Following internal reports of inappropriate conduct with a hotel guest and in accordance with company policy, we are terminating your contract, effective immediately. Elena didn't cry, she didn't argue. She picked up her bag and left her badge on the table. The pain wasn't new. The world always found a way to remind her of her place. But this time, it hurt differently. It hurt because, for a moment, she had believed she could be loved. Hours later, Ryan stormed into the office, furious. Who authorized this? She didn't do anything. The director looked at him firmly. The rules are clear, and you, more than anyone, know how this could affect the company's reputation. A staff member and the CEO, that spreads like wildfire. She's not a fling. He stopped, because he didn't even know what to say. She was everything, but it was already too late. Elena disappeared, changed her number, stopped answering, left the small apartment where she'd lived with her mother and brother, and vanished without a trace. Ryan, for the first time in his life, couldn't sleep. He spent nights pacing the living room, replaying the rooftop moment in his mind, trying to remember the sound of her voice, and asking himself, between one silence and the next, why didn't I protect her when I had the chance? Winter came early that year in Seattle. Mornings were cold, wrapped in a thick fog, as if the world had decided to hide what hurt too much. It had been over 3 months since the last glance on the hotel rooftop, since the almost kiss, the fall, the silence. Elena now lived in Tacoma, a smaller, quieter city just over an hour from her old life. She rented a small furnished studio in the back of a church, which also had a community room used by newly arrived immigrants. There, she found refuge and purpose. She taught English and Dutch to refugee children, kids from families who, like hers once had, arrived with more hope than money. She wore simple clothes, her hair always tied back, and shoes worn thin from walking. But on the mornings when she taught the alphabet or read children's stories in different languages, Elena felt something that almost could be called peace. Almost. One afternoon, one of her students, an 8-year-old Syrian girl named Noor, handed her a drawing. On the paper, 2 figures held hands in front of a house with different flags. Above them, the girl had written, in crooked letters, Miss Elena, and the man with grey eyes. Elena froze. Who's this? She asked, trying to smile. He's the man you dream about. I saw you sleeping on the couch the other day in the community room. You said his name. Ryan. Elena swallowed hard. The child had no idea what those words meant. She only knew what she saw. Elena pressed the drawing to her chest and murmured with a shaky voice, "Thank you, sweetheart." That night, when she got home, she left the TV on out of habit. The screen showed a gala event in Seattle, aired on a local channel. She recognized the ballroom, recognized the faces, recognized him. Ryan appeared smiling next to international investors, wearing his usual dark suit and polite expression. But to Elena, That smile looked empty. She knew. She knew him behind the armor. She knew the sound of his silence, his breath when he was afraid, the way he clenched his fists when he wanted to run. She sat on the mattress, still wearing her coat. His face filled the screen like a cruel reminder of everything they had been, or could have been. With a trembling hand, she turned off the TV. And in that small, cramped room, where the only sounds were the ticking of a clock and the soft rain falling outside, Elena cried quietly, like someone bleeding on the inside. Across the city, Ryan still went to the company building, but he wasn't the same. His business partners noticed his silence. Employees whispered about his absence from meetings, and society columns remarked on the missing central figure from the season's most luxurious events. He declined invitations, avoided interviews, cancelled trips. On an ordinary afternoon, sitting in his dark office, he stared at the coffee cup on his desk. It was cold, untouched, like the days stacking up one after another without meaning. His assistant entered and placed an envelope with international partnership proposals on the desk. Ryan didn't look up. "She's gone, and with her, so am I," he said, more to himself than anyone else. He tried to distract himself with other women, setups arranged by friends, expensive dinners, but it was all empty. No laugh sounded the same. No gaze had the same depth. He searched for Elena in every face, but only found emptiness. One night, he returned to the hotel rooftop, alone. He stood exactly where they had stood, looked down at the city below, and felt her absence like a weight on his chest. A cold wind cut through the air, but he didn't move. He stood there, reliving every word he hadn't said, every gesture he hadn't made. And then, for the first time in years, Ryan cried, not as a businessman, but as a man who, for the first time in his life, knew what it was to love and to lose. That same week, after another sleepless night, Ryan found himself driving aimlessly through Seattle's rain-soaked streets. The city felt suffocating. Traffic lights reflected on the foggy windshield like red and green ghosts, and the steering wheel slipped in his sweaty hands. He parked in front of the old university where he had studied business, not really knowing why he was there. He got out slowly, crossed the quiet campus, and climbed the steps to the language department building. The memories hit him like a gust of wind. Stuffy hallways, stacks of books, heated debates about linguistics and identity. He was greeted by a grey-haired professor with a kind expression, reading glasses hanging from his nose and a suit far too worn for someone who had been teaching for decades. "Professor Dempsey?" Ryan asked, his voice already shaking. The man looked up from the paper. "Mr. Whitmore, this is a surprise. I need help. I'm trying to find someone. Her name is Elena Van Dyke." The professor tilted his head slightly. "Elena, of course I remember her. She was one of the brightest students to ever come through here. Quiet, sensitive, but with an extraordinary mind. She had a natural talent for languages. It was like she felt the language, more than studied it." Ryan sat down without being invited. "She disappeared from my life, and I think I never really knew her." Professor Dempsey walked to a shelf and pulled out a light blue folder aged by time. "She wrote a brilliant paper on cultural nuances in emotional translation. She was even recommended for international scholarships, but she stopped attending classes. Said she had to take care of her mother, never came back. That was about 3 years ago." He opened the folder and pulled out a printed document. On the first page, in neatly typed letters, it read, "Between silences and words, the emotional construction in effective translation, Elena Van Dyke." But it was the dedication that hit Ryan like a slow blade. "For my mother. Because even when she forgot all the words, she still knew how to love me." He read it over and over again, his chest sinking as if there wasn't enough air in the world. His eyes began to burn. It wasn't just pain, it was shame. It was helplessness. She had always been extraordinary, but he had only seen the surface, only touched what was easy. "Can I keep this?" he asked, barely whispering. The professor nodded slightly. "She used to carry a blue notebook, you know, always scribbling phrases in Dutch, German, English, sometimes mixed with pieces of books and memories. It was like she wrote to not forget who she was." Ryan held the paper to his chest. "And I let her think she was just an employee." He stood in silence. As he left the room, he paused at the door and murmured, "Thank you, Professor. Today, I found out who she is, and who I never was." Outside, the wind was cold, but something inside him was beginning to warm. He didn't know where she was, but now he knew what to look for. She wasn't just the woman with green eyes. She was living memory. She was language. She was resilience. And he needed to find her, even if it was the last thing he ever did. The main hall of the Whitmore International Forum was packed. There were business people, investors, heads of international branches, members of the press, and influencers from the corporate world. The lighting was cool, the stage minimalist and modern. Everything had been meticulously organized for the Whitmore Group's annual presentation, the most anticipated event of the year in the hotel industry. At center stage, Ryan stood in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, lapel microphone clipped. To his shirt, eyes focused as the screen behind him displayed numbers, graphs, and global goals. But while the host introduced him and the applause rose like predictable waves, Ryan felt nothing. For the first time, he didn't want to talk about growth or projections. For the first time, he didn't care about shareholders. As he stepped onto the stage, there was something different in his expression. The whole room noticed. He walked calmly to the center. The screen behind him went dark. The crowd fell silent. And then he began, his voice firm, but with a tone that didn't match a financial report. "Today I was supposed to talk about expansion, profits, innovation, but none of that matters when you lose what truly has value." Some people exchanged puzzled glances. Cameras adjusted. No one knew where he was going with this. "Months ago, I met someone who showed me a different way of seeing the world. A woman who spent her life being invisible to people like me. And yet, she spoke with the soul of someone who carries the weight and beauty of many languages, including the language of silence." The audience fell into complete silence. "She taught me that love isn't measured in status, and it's not negotiated at fancy dinners. Love is when someone comes into your life and changes everything, even without promising anything." His hands trembled slightly as he held the microphone remote, but he didn't hide it. "I was a coward. I was afraid to break the rules, to cross the walls the world builds between people from different classes. But now I understand. The ones who truly shine were never on stage. They were the ones cleaning it." There was a soft murmur among the guests. And then, in a lower voice full of emotion, he said, "If she's listening, I just want to say I still think about you. Always." The silence was followed by a long, hesitant applause, which grew, spread, and turned into a wave of unexpected emotion. The cameras captured everything, and the video, which was supposed to be just another dry business conference, became a public love confession. Hours later, the video was already circulating the internet. Business sites, influencer pages, and even emotional story blogs were sharing. The footage with headlines like "The CEO Who Chose a Name Over Numbers" and "When the Truth Took the Stage." In Tacoma, after finishing a class, Elena stopped by the community center's computer room to print materials for her students. One of the volunteers said, "Did you see that viral video? A CEO giving it all up for love. It's like something out of a movie." She smiled faintly, not paying much attention, but then his name was mentioned, and her heart stopped. Ryan Whitmore. Elena froze. She excused herself, sat in front of the computer and searched for the video. The title appeared. Hotel chain's CEO moves the world with unexpected speech about love and invisibility. She clicked. When the image came up and he appeared on stage, her eyes filled with tears instantly. His voice cut through the screen, as if it was speaking straight to the heart she'd been trying to protect for months. She listened to every word. Her hand trembled on the mouse, and when he said, "I still think about you, always," the tears began to fall. But this time, it wasn't pain. It was something deeper. It was love. It was recognition. It was the certainty that he still saw her even from afar. That in a world that had always tried to erase her, someone had finally chosen to see her. Truly, truly. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold it in, but she couldn't. She let the tears fall freely in the middle of that cold room, surrounded by silent computers and children's voices in the background. For the first time, she cried, knowing she was still loved. Rain fell lightly and steadily that afternoon in Tacoma, tinting the sky a soft gray that seemed suspended in time. The children had just left the small community school where Elena taught. The last bursts of laughter echoed along the wet sidewalk as parents rushed, opening umbrellas and calling their kids with voices muffled by the damp wind. Elena stood in the doorway, watching the street like someone searching for something she wasn't sure she wanted to find. She wore a navy blue knit sweater, her hair in a messy bun, her face tired, but with that new glow that no matter how much she tried to hide it, kept resurfacing since the video. She took a deep breath, turned to close the school door, and froze. Across the street, standing in the fine rain with no umbrella, Ryan was there. Still, with his hands in the pockets of a soaked overcoat, his hair clung to his forehead, his eyes locked on her as if nothing else in the world existed. A man out of place, drenched, vulnerable, real. Elena's heart pounded. She was paralyzed. She saw him take one step, then another. He didn't run. He simply walked slowly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment since the day he lost her. He stopped in front of her, chest rising and falling, but his eyes were calm, so calm they seemed to plead in silence. "You really came," she murmured, barely believing it. Ryan simply nodded, and with a low voice, heavy with everything that had been stuck inside him for months, he whispered, "I never stopped looking for you." Elena felt her knees weaken for a second. Tears welled up hard, but she held them back. Her eyes locked onto his, as if trying to recover the lost time, as if confirming deep down that it was still him. She said nothing. She simply raised her hands, trembling, and touched his face. Raindrops ran down his warm skin, now mixed with the salt of the tears she no longer hid. Her fingers caressed his jaw, then his temples, like someone rereading a living memory. He closed his eyes, receiving the touch like a man being forgiven. And then she pulled him close. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't cinematic. It was real, full of everything they had held back. The nights she cried his name, the days he searched for her face in crowds. A kiss of return, of healing, of home. Cars passed in the distance. The sound of rain filled the space between the world and them, and in that moment there was no past or future, only two hearts that against all odds had found each other again. When their lips parted, Ryan rested his forehead on hers and whispered, breathless, "Tell me it's not too late." She closed her eyes, smiling through the tears, and answered softly, "If it's with you, it never will be." Months passed since the reunion in the rain, but the memory of that moment still felt as fresh as the air that day in Tacoma. What began with a quiet kiss turned, day by day, into something deeper, something solid. Elena and Ryan chose to live away from the spotlight, There was no magazine cover, no grand announcements. They chose the simplicity of real transformation, the kind that happens slowly in everyday life, in repeated gestures, in mutual listening. It was in a small room of an old, decommissioned public library that the project was born. With the help of donations and Ryan's own funds, they renovated the building, adapted classrooms, and developed an inclusive educational plan. And then they created the Lingua Viva Foundation, a free space where immigrants, refugees, and young people from marginalized communities could learn English, Spanish, French, Arabic, Dutch. But more than learning languages, they learned to be heard. On a sunny morning, the main room was full. Children from different backgrounds drew flags and wrote words on colorful chalkboards. A young Syrian man read a poem in English to a silent class. A Mexican grandmother learned to write her own name for the first time with trembling hands, laughing with her granddaughter. Ryan walked through the halls with a notebook in hand and a quiet smile. He wore jeans and a simple shirt, his hair a bit longer, less styled, and carried the calm look of someone who had finally found a purpose. That made sense. He stopped now and then to listen to a student, correct a sentence, or hold a baby so a mother could write. Elena watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame, wearing a light dress, her hair loose over her shoulders, and a calm gaze that now held hope instead of fear. "Have you noticed?" Ryan said, approaching. "I think these halls are more alive than any conference room in New York." Elena smiled, gently touching his hand. "That's because here, no one has to pretend to be someone they're not." Later that afternoon, she went to the empty room where she kept old materials and found, among faded papers, her old blue notebook, the same one she took to her university classes. The notes were faded, the corners bent, but the words still spoke. With the same strength, passages in Dutch, scribbled sentences, memories of her mother, dreams that once felt too far away, until now. She sat by the window and opened a new page. With a black pen, she began to write in silence. Outside, the city moved to its rhythm, but inside her something had changed forever. Elena's voice emerged in voiceover, like a memory speaking from within. "I thought I had to hide my story to be accepted. I thought my scars made me smaller, that my voice was too small, too strange, too invisible. But it was when someone heard it that I finally felt loved, because real love understands every silence." The final image shows the foundation's facade with a simple sign and her name below, Founding Director, Elena Van Dyke. On the park bench beside it, she and Ryan sit, hands entwined, watching the children play under the setting sun. Without saying a word, but saying everything. Final lesson: love is when two souls recognize each other, even in different languages. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I really want to know how much it moved you. If you enjoyed it, like the video, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel to keep following stories that touch the soul and make you reflect. And before you go, I've picked out another moving story that will draw you in even more. It's worth watching to the end.